we'll move on now to law reform, which is something that you were, leading on at that time as well, to Glen. And while everything else we've been discussing was going on, David Norris was taking his legal battle to challenge the 1861 and the 1885 laws. He would have lodged his case in 1977. It would have been heard in the Irish High Court in 1980, who would have upheld or ruled that it was constitutional based on the Christian nature of the Constitution. He would have appealed to the Supreme Court in 1983. They would have upheld that decision, despite Geoffrey Dudgeon winning his case in 1981 at the European Court of Human Rights. Norris was then forced to go to the European Court of Human Rights, and in 1988 they ultimately ruled, as they did in Geoffrey Dudgeon's case. It probably didn't come as too much of a surprise, I would imagine, at that time. And in September 1988, a month before the decision in the Norris case, a number of individuals and organisations met to plan how they would respond to the Norris ruling. That ultimately led to the establishment of the Gay and Lesbian Equality Network. So in 1988, what was Glen's priority?
Well, it's very simple, really. It was equality. And it was two phases of it, or aspects of it. One was we wanted a gay law reform that was based on equality. It had no different age of consent. It completely abolished the criminalisation of gay men. There were no special privacy restrictions. The other one then was employment equality legislation that included sexual orientation, equal status legislation that included sexual orientation, and a very particular one which was very easy to achieve, or relatively easy, was to put sexual orientation into the Unfair Dismissals Act, so that you couldn't be dismissed on the basis of it would be deemed automatically unfair to be dismissed for your sexual orientation.
And in 1988, the gay rights movement has been around now since 1974. In terms of political party support, was there much support for Glen's campaign at that stage?
No, well, we had to build it. The Labour Party were fairly supportive, and the Workers' Party, Sinn Féin, to a certain extent, but not a whole lot of support, I suppose, in Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, very active support. So the early days of Glen, after it was formed in 88, 89, was to build up, to consolidate our support and to win over people. And I suppose it was one of the interesting things is that because we had a de facto gay law reform in Ireland, like the law wasn't implemented, people weren't being sent to jail or being brought before the courts, that we could take some time to develop and build up the support for what were quite radical changes that we were proposing. And as the first step was to make sure that a British-style gay law reform wasn't introduced.
I mean, one thing that strikes me is you were meticulous in your planning. You were very, you knew what you wanted to do. And one thing which you certainly prioritised was the media and how you could use the media to get your narrative across around why law reform wouldn't be a bad idea. And Pádraig Kerrigan has touched on this in his recent book about the importance of Glen appearing on the Late Late Show in 1989. Can you talk a little bit about that and how significant, I think you yourself said it was a very significant moment for Glen's campaign, that appearance in 1989.
Yeah, I suppose for people, you'd have to be around in Ireland when Gay Byrne was, the compere and whatever presenter on the Late Late Show, because it was like a parliament of the people. Everybody watched it, and it often brought up, very. He went from the light-hearted, light entertainment to really, really serious issues and really difficult issues in Ireland. With the live audience there, and then everybody watching at home, and then it would be covered in the media afterwards. So if you won on the Late Late Show, you won a huge element of the Irish population and public opinion. And I remember before we went on it, because I was on the panel, and I remember being very, very scared, I suppose, really, because I knew it was that important. And we had never appeared on such a large programme like that. And we were put on with the right, so it wasn't a soft interview that with all lesbians and gay men. We were put on with our kind of bitter, loony opponents at the time. And, knowing that there was no set opinion at the time in Ireland on lesbian and gay issues. So this could be a game changer either way. If we made a mess of it, it could have set back our movement by a couple of years. But if we won, it could bring it forward. And I thought it was fascinating that we won. They came across as Looney Tunes, and we won, and everybody thought we looked lovely, and they thought they were mad. They looked mad. But it was interesting that one of the producers of the Late Show said to us afterwards that Gay Byrne went when they were preparing for it, and him going into the programme was neutral. You know what I mean? He didn't have a particular position one way or the other on it, and it was only when they came across as quite nasty. I mean, the famous back passages one where Gay Byrne responds by saying, "Well, I suppose you could say that men are obsessed by women's front passages." And that was such a creepy thing for that evangelical person to say. It was kind of awful. And Gay Byrne just thought, Jesus, you could, and then went on our side. You know what I mean? He and I'd say, and the Irish people were probably one of those pivotal moments where we won just by being nice.
And the other thing you were doing quite effective and certainly prioritised at that time as well was getting a number of international gay and lesbian organisations behind Glenn's campaign, the likes of the International Gay Association. And one thing that struck me was you would have drafted an awful lot of letters for international gay organisations to send them to the then Taoiseach at the time. And a lot of the language would have been, trying to in some way embarrass the government that Ireland is out of step with the way modern Europe is going, and a lot of international organisations did get involved in that campaign, didn't they? Yeah,
it was very important. The Irish or International Lesbian and Gay Association were huge supporters for us, and again, it's easy to forget, and it's hard to imagine now, like how little resources Glen had at the time. The Hirschfeld Centre had burned down, so Glen had no office. Glen had no filing cabinet. We relied on Nexus Research, for example, to send out faxes because Owen Collins worked in Nexus Research. We tried to do some fundraising amongst, kind of gay men who would have been key beneficiaries of gay law reform, etc., who would have had, we would consider would be fairly well off. And we raised little or nothing. So we were kind of operating on vapour. And so the support from ILGA and from its constituent organisations in various countries like France or whatever, was hugely important also in terms of, your spirit, because if you need your spirit boosted in campaigns that are going on for a long time, and so that they did boost our spirit as well as annoy the government, embarrass the government.
And moving on to 1990, which I think was quite an important year for Glenn's campaign. The Law Reform Commission comes out in support of an equal age of consent, but also you have the Irish Council for Civil Liberties publishing a very important and effective document, Equality Now. And Glenn would have been involved in both of those. He would have, submitted proposals to the Law Reform Commission. Do you want to just talk a little about those two particular moments as well and what they meant for Glenn's campaign at that time?
I suppose the one that Glenn had most involvement in was the ICCL thing, because we went to Tom Cooney, who was the chair of the ICCL at the time, to put that proposal to him. And the ICCL was in tatters at the time because they had gone through all sorts of splits and problems. But fair dues to Tom Cooney, he really prioritised it and delivered it and wrote fantastically on the whole on the failure of the Irish Supreme Court and the High Court, and argued for human rights legislation, equality legislation, and also recognition of domestic partnerships, which was quite innovative at that time. And now I'm going into my anecdotage, but Tom Cooney later was the advisor to Alan Shatter when he was Minister for Justice. So he was involved, it's an interesting arc of history that he was involved in, say, for example, the development of the children's legislation, which was very important in bringing civil partnership through. To go back to the Law Reform Commission, that was vital, because there was two aspects of that was vital. Was that they, in terms of sexual offences, they argued for gender neutral sexual offences, and that legislation was introduced so that an offence against a man, or a sexual offence against a man or a woman, was treated the same. And that allowed the gay law reform to be very simple, because the penalties for sexual abuse did not have to be repeated in the gay law reform. The 1865 Act could simply be abolished. And there was, I suppose there's a very interesting thing about the Law Reform Commission, that there wasn't a single priest or cleric on the Law Reform Commission. And it's one of those very interesting shining examples of a secular state, Ireland, whereas before, like, the church and the state were in cahoots with one another, like they were in UCD and places, like there were professors of sociology who were priests and under the thumb of the Archbishop of Dublin and so on.
I suppose the timing of those two documents as well was quite important, because Glynn certainly didn't have it all their own way, and there would have been quite, as you mentioned in the Late Late Show, quite outspoken individuals and groups, and one group in particular would have been Family Solidarity, who published their own publication in 1990 called The Homosexual Challenge, and they would have been trying to use AIDS as justification for the maintenance of the laws. And I'm just wondering, in terms of dealing with and responding to opponents, what was Glenn's strategy to I suppose, counteract their message?
I suppose the basic one was, well, first of all, you just deal with the facts, like you because they wrote articles for the Irish Times, quoting crazy research from the United States about how gay men were more likely to be mentally unstable, or, on sexual health issues, HIV and AIDS and stuff like that. And Christopher Robson was really good at responding to that with the facts, and then you could get to the real debate. But one thing we never did is we never really attacked the Catholic Church or anything like that. We didn't want to engage in a culture war at all, like that happened in the United States. So instead of kind of having a go at them, we kind of more highlighted what our beliefs were, and people used to get fed up with me saying these things and thought I was Pollyanna, but saying how Irish people are progressive and are supporters of human rights, and that is part of our traditions. And while the right would be using traditional family values or traditional Irish values to keep us down, we were going to use those traditional values, about struggle for trade unions, against colonialism, Daniel O'Connell, even for religious freedom, Daniel O'Connell, as an alternative. So you're setting out, instead of like having a go at them and trying to demolish them, by your rhetoric, which might be enjoyable, but what you're doing is you're building an alternative that is more attractive to Irish people. And I put that into a phrase that with Glenn, at the opening of Glenn, was that our first task was to consolidate our supporters, win over the doubtful, pacify those who were opposed, and then what I did, we never say in public, but I can say it now, is isolate the bigots. So like you're left with a kind of like a 5%. And so the pacify the opposed is that you let sleeping dogs lie. Don't go out and try and energize the opposition. Try to say, look, it's grand, it's nothing. No problem, nothing will.
Yeah, and it's interesting
change.
you'd say that about not attacking the Catholic Church, because one of the things that slightly surprised me in my own research was Glenn's comparison and almost embracing of Catholic Ireland. You often hear him say, "Oh, look at good Catholic Spain or good Catholic Poland. They have an equal age of consent." And that was I suppose a message that you would have written a lot about as well in the Irish Times, and to such a degree that Nuala Fhuelán, I think at one stage picked up on this, and she was like, yeah, look at good Catholic Poland, despite an equal age of consent, they've managed to elect a pope. So I think it certainly caught on, and I think Minister Gagan Quinn certainly picked up on that as well in her address when she was introducing the laws in the bill in 1993. The other thing about Glen is you were extremely patient, but I think by 1992 that patience is certainly wearing slightly thin, and it's not helped, I think, by Albert Reynolds, who counteracted what his representative to the Council of Europe said in, I think it was possibly in April 1982, and the rep had said, listen, Ireland's going to introduce legislation by the end of 1992. Albert Reynolds came along and said, I wouldn't be so sure about that. It's not really a priority for us right now. And then in September, he said, listen, it's now at the bottom of our list. And I think at that stage, your patience certainly had worn thin, and I think wrote to the Council of Europe and asked them to give Ireland an ultimatum, I think, at that stage.
I remember having a lunch with Christopher Robson, and we were drafting the letter that we were going to send to the Council of Europe, and we said, Chris and myself said, will we give the Irish government 6 months now or 3 months? And then we burst out laughing, thinking like, here, two individuals who were pretty powerless, and the organisation is pretty powerless. But there was two things, I suppose. One was that we felt we had built up enough support amongst the political parties and the NGOs, the Council for the Status of Women, trade unions, travellers, people with disabilities, for a campaign for equality that included a gay law reform, the basic equality and equality legislation. So we had all our ducks in a row. We felt that now is opportune to push for the early implementation of the law reform.
I think one of the things that struck me about that particular year as well is, and I think it looks fantastic, is the giant pink cake outside Leinster House. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Who came up with the idea?
I don't know, but again, it was that thing of not being, some people mightn't like this now, but it was about not being angry, visibly angry. Angry is a good motivating force, but if at that stage in Ireland, because we were such a small and beleaguered minority, we thought that being angry about something wasn't necessarily going to work. So as Chris described it, it was a sardonic birthday party, and the idea was to poke fun at the government, and we produced a single-page thing of how they contradicted themselves, saying, "Oh, it's going to be introduced next month." No, it's not. It won't be introduced at all. And then, so it was a mockery, I suppose.
I mean, it looked great. It was a pink cake with 4 candles, and then "Happy Birthday, Norris," I think. Is that what was written on it?
Yeah, and kind of fireworks or those kind of firecrackers and stuff.
And a few weeks after that, then there's kind of a game changer in the sense that there's a general election, and that was I think a big changing moment for Glen's campaign. The Labour Party enjoys its best general election result. I think it had included law reform in its manifesto, but Fianna Fáil had one of its worst elections. Yeah. So I want to come as well. So that was a quite a game changer. December 1992, probably one of the highlights maybe for many of you. Mary Robinson invites gay and lesbian organisations to Áras an Uachtaráin in terms of Glen's campaign, but also in terms of the symbolism of that visit. How important was it for Ireland's gay community, that invitation?
I think it was hugely important, because President Mary Robinson was hugely popular and won over a huge amount of support once she became president. Much more so than her vote that she got in the presidential election, and had that kind of she had that symbolic value of the new Ireland and stuff, and of a caring president, for immigrants or travellers or whatever. So it received huge coverage in the media, and there's an aspect about social change and political change. That's not rational in a sense. Like, arguments do convince people to a certain extent, but not really, I think. I think, there's almost a sense that political change or social, for Glenn, it's almost like a form of psychotherapy, like you're delving into people's deepest beliefs, feelings about their future, feelings about their children, blah, blah, blah. And so that kind of psychotherapeutic political event was phenomenally important. And it was a delight for the lesbians and gay men who were there.
So in January of 1993, then the Labour Party and Fianna Fáil go into coalition and Mara Gagan Quinn is given the portfolio of the Department of Justice. I just wanted to talk about this very famous meeting between Glenn, the Minister for Justice, Mara Gagan Quinn, and the wonderful Phil Moore.
Yeah.
Recently, Mara Gagan Quinn tweeted about Phil Moore, and she said, and I quote, "Phil Moore changed my life. More to the point, she changed the lives of generations of gay people because she changed my life." Can you just talk to us a little bit about that meeting? Why was Phil Moore invited, and who was Phil Moore, just so people who maybe aren't familiar with her might know?
Phil Moore at one stage was described as the mother of all gay men in Ireland. She was one of the key people in a group called Parent Support, which is a group of parents of lesbians and gay men. And she was on the Late Late Show. She was quite active as a feminist as well, and her son was gay. And that was a very carefully choreographed meeting. She didn't turn up by accident or anything like that. That was deliberately there, designed to tug at heartstrings, to speak. So Chris and myself could do the political speak, and Susie was there, she could do the political speak as well. But again, you like arid ideas don't convince people or don't energize people or don't win people over so that they become, champions. And Chris and myself were doing our usual thing, probably saying, like Europe and, the age of consent here, there and everywhere. And after a while, Mara Gagan Quinn said, "Okay, shut up." She didn't say that, but effectively said, "Enough! Who's this woman? I want to talk to her." And that was Phil Moore. And Phil Moore was a fair old actor herself, because she said to us later on that she had dressed up, even she got her most bourgeois, middle-class mother clothes to wear, and probably wore parfum de trois spray or something like that, So she was very carefully putting herself across as, your average Irish mother, and how she was fighting for her son, and it won.
So Kieran, after that meeting with Mara Gagan Quinn, then she went away, and in June 1993, then she rose in Dáil Éireann and she introduced the law reform. What did she ultimately decide with? Did she go with Glenn's wishes, or did she?
Yeah, totally. She accepted the Glenn proposals, which was complete equality, no difference in age, an equal age of consent of 17. Complete. It was a kind of a funny phrase that any law by which buggery is criminalised is hereby abolished, and so that abolished the common law offence of buggery and the 1865 Act, everything. So it was a slam dunk, and the Labour Party had a huge input into that. Getting that full equality option.
And the other thing that often maybe has gone under the radar is the fact that the Unfair Dismissals Act was also amended in 1993 and included sexual orientation.
Yeah. In fact, I was brought in before the gay law reform, and as Chris Rob, that was another Fianna Fáil minister, Mary O'Rourke, who was the Minister of State. Rory Quinn was the overall minister. And as Christopher Rob said, we spent as much energy getting gay law reform as we put into getting 2 words into the Unfair Dismissals Act, which is sexual orientation, exactly where we wanted them, in fact. But yeah, it was tremendous, because also that government, that Labour Fianna Fáil government, had a very strong commitment to equality legislation, which we now have, and had a minister for equality and law reform, Mervyn Taylor. So it was things were looking good then in 1993.
So it's a wonderful coincidence as well that as soon as the bill was passed, it coincided with Dublin Gay Pride.
Just a few days later, yeah.
And I was just wondering, maybe if you gave this wonderful speech outside the Central Bank, I think it was, which I think summed up really the 20 or so years of activism and how significant a moment was, and the fact that it was a struggle, but there was an awful lot of, we'll say, positives as well that had happened throughout those 20 years, and the likes of yourself and many others deserve, considerable praise and gratitude for what you've done to make Ireland a more inclusive society. And I was wondering, would you mind maybe just to conclude this conversation, if you'd read that wonderful speech that you gave outside the Central Bank?
Sure. We all had a dream that one balmy summer's day we would celebrate being full and equal citizens of this Irish Republic. This is the day. It is a victory for all those struggling for equality in this country. These reforms are a great achievement for Irish society and its lesbian and gay community. Today we can be here, proud to be Irish citizens and proud to be lesbians and gays. We really believe that Irish people are progressive, that Irish people do support the lesbian and gay community, do support human rights and equality, and have no time at all for bigotry. I think we also have to say that this law reform that we have got was not inevitable. It could have been delayed. We could have got the British-style gay law reform. I think we've got equality because of the Irish tradition of struggling for civil, political and religious freedom. Everyone here did it. Everyone here helped. Everyone who came out to their parents. Everyone who said, I'm not going to put up with discrimination.
Hear, hear. Thanks very much, Kieran.
You're welcome.